Well, and welcome to another episode of the AV Experience. I'm your host, Ryan, and we're joined by somebody new, Ben Goff of Cinema Bureau today. Ben did an AVS podcast with myself and Eric. What did we even talk about, Ben? I don't even remember.
We talked about levels and why speakers die, what kills things, and
How
how
reference isn't necessarily something you should focus on.
right,
Yeah.
which came from some CD standards work we're doing, and we just kind of evolved what we talked about from there, I guess, right?
Yeah. And Matt or Ben immediately, I said Matt because we're looking at an image of Matt Pose from 6 years ago. And my brain was still thinking about that image. But Ben immediately got hate mail from the community about this. No, you didn't. But I think it's a great topic. But today we're going to talk a bit more about bass and some theoretical stuff, some things that Ben's working on in his room, the Foundry. And I think it'll be a good discussion. I think people will find this interesting. We're going to talk a lot about the time domain, which I don't think gets enough attention in our industry, especially from enthusiasts. Everybody wants to focus on the sexy frequency domain, and time just gets pushed off to the side. But before we get into that, have you recovered from Expo? Are you got a cold?
Yeah, I mean, hey, do I ever recover? I'm not sure. As long as I'm recovered, I fly back out of the UK a week today. I've got a long haul flight, so as long as my ears have recovered and my sinuses are good for next week, I'll be fine.
What took your ears out? What was too loud?
No, it was the flight.
Oh,
I have a habit of getting,
okay.
pick up a cold, block sinuses, fly
Mm-hmm.
too much. It's yeah, less than ideal.
Okay. So it's not theaters being too loud. It was actually the airplane and compression and dealing with and being sick.
Yeah, I mean, let's be fair, none of the demos at ISC this year were great on the ears, let's be fair. But I
No.
mean, I sometimes think we just have different perspectives to many people. I kept being told by people, oh, this room's the best thing I've ever heard, that room's the best thing I've ever heard. I'm not sure they've heard many rooms, but
But it is our job in a lot of cases to be at the bleeding edge of things. So what we consider to be the best. It's like driving a hypercar and then trying to go back to a Toyota Corolla or something. The Toyota
right.
Corolla is still good, but when the hypercar becomes your norm, you're kind of jaded in a way where
Yeah,
the
for sure.
expectation on it's not that the Toyota Corolla is bad. It's just the expectation on what you define as best is so far out there in comparison to what a lot of other people have experienced that it can be quite skewed to some
Right.
people.
Yeah, and we're both, I guess we're fortunate. Our rooms are probably not dissimilar. Um,
Mm-mm.
there's maybe slight difference in size between them, but we've
Your
used
room is
pretty
bigger.
similar kit. We've used
Yes.
the same internal acoustics as a
Really, a
concept.
lot of stuff is very similar, even down to projection. I mean, I think you've got an Earthus, I've got a Griffin, but as far as capability, they're not so dissimilar in a
Yeah,
way.
I guess they're pretty much the same DSP chip. They're pretty much the same output.
Yeah. I'm
So,
sure that the companies would beg to differ that there is differences and benefits and whatever, but
oh,
our
100%.
rooms are probably pretty similar.
Yeah,
Okay.
I think that's probably true. Which is interesting, isn't it? That we've landed on very similar designs using very similar kit in a very
Hmm.
similar way.
And you're halfway
That
around the world.
yeah, that
Yeah.
tells me we probably both did okay.
Or we're both really bad at what we do.
I trust you enough to think that they're similar enough because we both did okay. But
Okay, that's fair. That's fair. Okay, so you brought this up really when you and I first started talking at the Ascendo dinner on that Tuesday night at ISE with Jeffries.
feast. We can't say dinner, the
Yes, the
feast. Feast.
medieval feast. And for anybody that doesn't know, so Jeffrey, the owner of Ascendo, puts on this elaborate dinner for his distributors and some of the dealers that come out. And elaborate is probably an understatement. It is over the top. So this one, and correct me if I'm wrong, Ben, it was 14 courses with effectively 14 wine pairings. And it was every time you would turn around and you'd be talking to somebody, somehow more food, and it was always different food and different wine would appear in front of you.
I remember 8 different wines, which
Okay.
means
So,
that there probably was more than 8, and I either didn't get to them, or I don't remember them, but I remember 8 wines. One of which, let's be honest, was more like a. I mean, it wasn't like a wine, was it? It
The
was
the old
older than
one?
us, right? I
Yes.
think it was from early 80s. It had been aging since then.
Hmm.
It was almost a cognac or something. It was pretty incredible.
Yeah, and it was mixed with a bunch of other vintages and some other things, and there were only X amount of bottles that were made at this monastery, and we had a sommelier there. It was crazy. But regardless of all of that, we got on a discussion, and Ben, I think it's best for you to kind of give a synopsis of what the discussion was before we get into the topic about
Yeah.
bass and about issues that I think plague a lot of rooms, but I don't think people know that it's an issue plaguing rooms. And it's not, we're chasing percentage points at this point. We're chasing finality. Like, how can we make this any better? It doesn't mean that people have bad rooms. We're just trying to make and get the most out of it. So, Ben, can you give a little bit of a breakdown on what
Yeah.
you were trying to
So
get across or what you're
it's
trying to accomplish?
it's something that's been niggling me for a while, and I'm not going to claim to have the answer. Right? The reason we're discussing this is because we don't have the answers yet. That's why it becomes an interesting 2 hours over dinner chat, because if we had the answers, it would be easy. It's a 10-minute
Hmm.
discussion. So it's it's interesting because we don't. And the thing that's been niggling me is seeing a lot of outputs from rooms and how they've been EQ'd and how they've been put together. And from my own experience, whether I actually think that's going to sound very good. So I guess if we look at a lot of enthusiasts and stuff who share measurements of their rooms, people get really focused and hung up on this flat response, on really
Hmm.
tuning the frequency response to be exactly following a line they want. But I guess the first question is, does that in the low frequency, so like sub frequencies, does that really matter? We're not going to argue it at higher frequencies, right? Floyd's work is kind of untouched, like untouchable. We're not going to argue that at higher frequencies you can predict from the shape of that frequency response roughly how much someone's going to like it. That's sort of beyond doubt.
Can you give some enlightenment for those that don't know what you mean from Floyd's work on
Yeah.
what
So
people are going to like based on the shape of the response?
so there's years of work that was done by Floyd Toole and the other researchers at Harman and others since, that they're showing that in-room response of a speaker, you can get a really, really high correlation between what a graph shows and is predicted of what's going to happen and what someone likes. So they
Hmm.
they essentially know the frequency response that somebody will find pleasurable, and that we all hear differently. It's easy to say
Hmm.
that, but the reality is, you take most people
Hmm.
and give them a room that measures in the way that research shows, and the likelihood is they're going to like it.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's kind of beyond any critique at this stage. Like that research just holds up. It's fine tuning, sure, but that broad shape that they talk about in their work, it's just right, and it
Right.
is for
Okay.
most people. Um, but I'm not sure, and this is an interesting one, whether I've not read enough of their literature to really have got to the bottom of it or where we're at. But I don't think when they did the same research, the same sort of group of people at Harman, whether they focused on more than just the frequency response. And
Now, are we talking about speakers still, or are we talking now into subs or
at this
both?
point, really subs kind
Okay.
of, so specifically low frequency. My theory at the moment is very much that we are as sensitive to what's happening in the time domain as the frequency domain. Like it's I'm going to paraphrase a friend and now colleague of mine, Peter Aylett, who regularly says that timing errors don't exist in nature. Like
Yeah.
Or sorry, in fact, neither of these do. Frequency errors don't exist in nature because there's no such thing as a perfect frequency tone. What we're interested in is like what sounds real and what the reality is. And
Mm-hmm.
these errors don't exist naturally. So if we create errors in one or the other, trying to fix one or the other, does it still sound real and natural? And I think this time is a forgotten issue that people get so focused on just, they open up REW, they run a sweep, probably from a single microphone position. They're not even really actually looking at other spots. Like they get focused on this, right, single position,
And that's
do a
okay if you're
sweep.
really only concerned primarily about the one position, though you do have room modes and some other things that can impact it.
It's sort of okay.
Yeah.
It's not my preference now. We'll explain what that preference is in a minute. I'll come back to that.
Okay.
Why it's not my preference, but even for one seat, I think a single mic position's not really a great option. Probably not a great option at all, to be fair. So yeah, we've got this interesting thing of every time you try and fix the frequency response, you're
Mm-hmm.
probably breaking the time response more. You're
Right.
moving it further away. Now, there's always going to be a natural group delay. So as the speaker gets lower in levels, as we start to approach lower and lower, there's going to be delay. Like that delay is pretty much inherent to the build of a subwoofer.
And for those that don't know, do you mind defining what group delay actually is and what it's doing?
Yeah, that's a challenge. I should have a proper definition for that. But essentially we are getting more delay. Like on a typical subwoofer in a typical system, it's
Mm-hmm.
quite clear that the amount of delay is increasing as the frequency gets lower. And that will be typical of just about every subwoofer system we've got. That
Now, am I correct in saying that an ideal group delay is that all frequencies are occurring at the same time? Ideally.
I think so. So the reason that's interesting is whenever we go back to research,
Mm-hmm.
we often go to the same group of incredibly experienced researchers, and I don't believe they covered, certainly in low frequency, I don't believe they've covered that in their research.
Well, I think a
So
lot of low frequency, it's not low frequency in general is not covered nearly as much as higher frequencies are. I think
right,
that's a bane of what we're running into is and I could very well be absolutely wrong, but it just feels like a lot of the research that is done is focused on if they do get down low, it's focused more on what we readily hear than even getting into infrasonics. And that is
right,
abhorrently ignored in a lot of cases.
sure.
But what
And
we're
I
finding
guess
is that the time domain is way more important than the frequency domain, especially as you get further and further and further down in the
right,
range.
and I guess the thing that has set me off researching this and trying to get some answers out. And I should say at this point, I am a designer of systems. I am not a calibrator. I can calibrate pretty well. I'm not terrible as a calibrator. I know my way around what I'm doing.
You're pretty
But
good, but you're not like Adam Peltz or
right,
anybody
it's
like
not
that.
my specialism. I am not flying around the world every day calibrating systems.
But
So
you understand it. You
I know what I
understand
want to achieve and I
sound
think I
to a
know the tools
point.
available, right?
Yeah.
So yeah. But I start as a designer, so I think of F1. I aspire to be Adrian Newey, not Lewis Hamilton. I'm never going
Mm-hmm.
to claim to be the best calibrator in the world. So there's probably loads of little tricks that a really good calibrator will have that I don't, and I totally accept that there's probably things that I want to fix that others may already have the answer to.
But I think you're trying to fix them in a way that you're not having to fix them in EQ. You're trying to fix them more at the analog level than you are trying to fix them further down using filters or other software
Yeah,
means.
I guess my perfect room, in theory, is a room that we could build that requires zero EQ at any frequency.
Yes, I would agree with that.
Like that's the theoretical ideal. If we could
Because you're
make a room where the acoustics of that room was so perfect and the
mhm.
speaker choice was perfect and everything Like it's theoretical because it's never going to happen. Like we're never going to achieve a room that needs zero EQ at any frequency and every seat sounds perfect. It's not realistic. We're always going to use some things. Once you put an acoustically transparent screen in, well, the likelihood is we're going to use an EQ to correct some of what the screen's done.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm not claiming that we could ever build a room that needs zero EQ at all, but the less you use, the better.
I guess it depends on what the definition and you would need to define when you would need EQ. Because even in nature, your seat to seat consistency frequencies are going to change as you're in different positions from the emitting source.
Right.
So as it moves through different materials, so you would have to just define at what point is it necessary and what is your end use case. But I guess if you're all trying to experience the same thing, that defines that you would need some level of EQ. But I would argue that that's not necessarily how nature is, in a way.
Right. Yeah. So that's, and this will come down to the choice and the position of all the speakers and things. Because, like, if we're talking about EQ higher in the frequency domain, well, we know speakers get directional. That directionality changes with frequency relative to driver size. So
Yes.
you'll get a speaker becomes less and less directional, generally approaching the crossover as the wavelength gets shorter relative to the driver size.
And for anybody
So
that
it will
doesn't know,
start
this is a primary reason why you have multiple different size drivers in speakers. It's to get away from beaming.
right. Yeah. So that being, depending on the design choices the speaker designer made, you're going to go from a really broad dispersion, probably begin to beam before the crossover. Then at the crossover point, it's probably broader again. You'll often see on polar plots of that response that it narrows and widens, and you
Let
can
me
see
see
where
if
the
I can
crossover is.
find
And you can
one.
tell right away where that crossover is.
Yeah. Go ahead and keep going. I'm going to see if I can find a polar plot to
Perfect.
illustrate
So
what we're talking
the
about.
idea that we would need no EQ for any seat would mean needing to find the perfect speaker and put it in the perfect place and get your seats like it's not real. That's our goal, is to get as close to it as we can, and it's that ultimately shapes why we do acoustics the way we do in rooms. And both our rooms are kind of built that way, that we don't have so specific positions where, right, we've got absorption here, then we put diffusion there. In both of our rooms, I think it's fair to say that every surface that's treated is treated equally for absorption and diffusion in all locations. Is
I
that
wouldn't
true of yours?
necessarily say it's equal, but every surface is dealing with absorption and diffusion
Right.
simultaneously. Yes.
Yeah. So you don't have any panels specifically in your room that is just an absorber.
No.
Every panel you have is doing both some absorption and some diffusion, right?
For bass, that changes, but for the high frequency
Sure.
stuff in the room, yes, that
Yeah.
is absolutely the case.
And that kind of aids this lack of EQ as a concept, because everything is a first reflection from once we've got crazy numbers of speakers, there's going to be a first reflection, a second reflection somewhere. Well, starting to treat the whole room the same way starts to give us the reality that probably, I'm going to open my screen a bit bigger so I can see that.
So here's the polar plot. This is the horizontal. It's actually probably easier to see it in the vertical right here.
Yeah,
You can
you
see it
can see
start to
there where,
beam and then come out and then start to beam and then come out. So every time you're seeing this change, more than likely, this is a crossover point.
yeah. Yeah, or something specific in the design of a horn, or something that's
Waveguide or
very
something
specific.
going
But
on. Yes.
yeah, so that itself, I guess, is a challenge to a zero EQ system. But I would still love to achieve it, because every time we use EQ, we are changing the delay of some frequencies more than others.
And I think that's important for people to realize that anytime you are putting a filter in, you are not necessarily just making things better. You are changing things in the time domain. You're
Right.
changing things in the frequency domain, but you're also changing things in the time domain. So while you could have this perfectly flat frequency response, your time could be a complete and utter disaster. And that's why a lot of times, you've heard Jonathan and I say this before, that in most cases, and this is why you're saying you don't want EQ, less is more, is
Right.
because you're not impacting time and you can get a much more uniform response. And it's going to be because our ears are super sensitive, even though we don't realize it. And you alluded to this at the beginning, to time, um, that it's just going to be overall better, even if you have some wiggles, or as you call them, niggles, in the response. You're going to have an overall better experience because time is going to be better suited.
Right. So, I mean, I have a table open on my desk. I did slightly prepare for some of what we were going to talk about.
Let's be real.
I
You didn't prepare. You've just been preparing as you're talking.
Yeah, no, I had this one ready. Like,
Okay.
you'll realize I hate going into any conversation without some idea of what I'm gonna be doing. So, if you take an IR filter, right? So you've got a notch filter that you're going to apply.
If you send it to me in WhatsApp, if you want to share it, I can put it on screen.
Yeah, let me take a screen grab of it and I will send it to you. I'm going to completely admit I haven't actually checked this data is right. I got GPT to write it for me a while ago.
I think that's okay as long as it gets the idea across.
The concept is definitely
Yes.
right. So,
And guys,
okay.
if you have questions in chat, I think it's really important because a lot of times when I watch YouTube videos historically, I don't have the opportunity to question what is going on or for better understanding. So if you have a question about what we're talking about, feel free to drop it in the chat and then we can address it. And if we don't know, I think Ben agrees that we will either find the answer out or point you in the direction to gain that information on your own.
If the question exists and we don't know the answer, then we probably should. So we need to go and learn it.
Yes. All right. So I need to download this and then let's throw
So what this is
up.
about to show is if you're using a standard notch filter, so an IIR filter, and these were based on having the same magnitude. So you're fixing a notch of the same size. Look at how difference in the time domain is depending on frequency and how
Now, when you're saying a
the shape of
notch,
that
are you
filter
talking
changes.
about you're fixing the shape of the frequency?
Correct. So the higher the Q there, the smaller the bandwidth of that filter is going to attack. So a Q of 10 means it's really narrow. It's affecting very few frequencies. Like a Q of 0.5 is quite broad, so that's having a general shaping of response. A Q of 10 is like fixing a tiny little individual thing.
And
So
just to
when
get this point across, just so people understand, when we're talking about a Q of 10, it's a very acute angle. It's very sharp, and you're fixing just a couple points in the frequency range.
right,
It could be broader, but as it gets broader and broader and broader, just to make sure people understand, as you decrease the Q, it's more of a blanket. You go more obtuse in the angle, coming into flat, and it's going to be further out. But you'll notice in the table, as you become more flat, the effect as far as delay becomes much less.
exactly that. Right. So 1 second, I'm just dealing with my business partner. So if you look, if you're chasing that perfectly flat response, if you're only looking at the frequency magnitude and you're not looking at time at all, think what happens when you start throwing 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 different filters in on your subs. Suddenly you've got individual delays at different and high Q filters particularly, right? So you start throwing around a few of these high Q filters. Look at 50 hertz. You suddenly could be adding 10 milliseconds of delay. Well, seems like nothing, but what I'm essentially proposing here is that and this is where the conversation really started. This is the fun bit. I think you can feel that more than you hear it. So if you want to get that, like being at a live concert and the kick drum goes and it rattles straight through your chest, the reason it does that at a live concert is, well, you've got no standing waves to start with. Of course, it rattles straight through you. It's a single wave that comes from the stage. There's no wave coming back. There's no standing waves here. This is a wave front that's come straight from the stage at you at most concerts. And it's just this instant pressure wave hits you, and it's really well time aligned. You know, a good outdoor engineer is going to have got this time alignment really tight, and you get that, you know, all those frequencies hit you together as this same thing, and you get that decent impact in your chest. It gets harder inside a room because we've got all the reflections and everything else happening anyway. But once you start to add a load of filters in, you're going to be smearing that. You know, you could easily find that between different frequencies now, suddenly you've got 30, 40, 50 milliseconds of different delay at different frequencies. Well, that means things like the harmonics are hitting you slightly later. Like you've got this smear. Well, that isn't conducive to giving you that really cool slam in the chest that you'd get from a live kick drum. You know, a live kick drum has not got this group delay in the same way that we're adding it and creating it and building on what's naturally there. So I guess where I am really interested in is, we've got all these techniques. Like, there's so many techniques that exist for getting really good, even seat to seat consistency. We talk about, right, just add more subwoofers. It's great. Add more subwoofers and you'll be able to get it more consistent. But if you're adding more subwoofers and not perfectly aligning them in time, then you're going to improve the frequency response, but again, make time worse.
Now, you made a comment when you and I were talking about this earlier, about summation and how that's not necessarily the best way to attack this. It is close, but it's good, but you're still leaving something on the table in a lot of cases. Because if you don't look at time, you can't get it perfect, because in the frequency domain, you might not be able to see the imperceivable changes as you get a summation to come up. But if you look at time, you may be able to see those changes and dial it in just that little bit further. That, I think, is what you talked about, the hit, the feel.
Yeah.
That's all in time. So even if you have summation and you have all of that coming up, a lot of people may get it where they get the feel, but I think it could be better if you also address time at the same,
absolutely,
in the same way.
I'm not going to do the maths. I'll just try and remember where I'm at on the maths. I've managed to now close that browser screen. That's really.
And just to be clear, Stephen, I know you said that was a really cool graph. As Ben said, we don't know if that data is perfect. That was done by ChatGPT. So don't take that as gospel. Do research it and find out what those values are. That was really used to illustrate as an example, not as absolute values. Right, those could be way off, but it gives you the idea of what's going on.
The concept is sound. Whether those numbers were actually, I haven't actually checked them. I just made that graph 10 minutes before we started, so I had it as a reference point. But yeah, we'll check exactly what they are. So I've definitely been in rooms before where, you know, the calibrator has gone for this perfect summation, but what they've actually done at the point they've really focused on is they're maybe one or multiple cycles out of time. So instead of actually having those aligned perfectly, they're so far out that they're back in time in frequency terms, but time-wise, they're completely wrong. But they're not even looking at any graph to look at that in time at all. They're just, you know, I think too many people are just looking at the frequency response.
Yes.
And my gut feeling says that if a frequency response is not perfect, we probably don't actually care as much. Like, audibly, I don't think we care as much. I think you could get away with having this frequency response that's got some undulations in it, especially high Q. Like, at low frequency, these high Q anomalies probably don't even affect
No.
like you, if it's a big room mode that's huge, sure. But
I
if
th-
there's
I think it becomes the high Q, the lower the frequency gets, the more noticeable they are. But this is a reason why smoothing is so important when you're looking at REW. Do not focus on an
right,
unsmooth graph. You're going to run into, you're going to be chasing something that doesn't exist, and you're not going to hear it. You need to use more than likely more smoothing than you think in order to give yourself, I won't call it a false perception, but a more realistic perception to what you're actually hearing, in my opinion. Now, this is something that Ben and I are looking more into. I'm can honestly say that if we went and talked to Adam or Floyd or Peter, they'd be like, "Oh yeah, we've been doing that." But I think it's really important to relay this to enthusiasts because I think there's a hyper focus on frequency when realistically you don't need to spend near as much time on it, nor do you need to care if it's necessarily flat. And if you do care, you really need to treat it analog, using the room placements, adding more subs, fixing speaker locations, those different things instead of hitting it in software. That's going to lead
so
to problems.
I've just sent you, Ryan, two screen grabs. I've taken these online. I actually don't have RAW on this machine I'm sat on, so I couldn't use any of my own real ones.
Mm-hmm.
But I've just shown you a couple of wavelet plots, and I think this is a really good way. I hung out with Matt Pose over here at Foundry, I guess, a year or so ago, and we're talking and looking at this around specifically around the crossover. So that first one I've just sent you, the top one there, this essentially is showing the time that peak energy arrives in the room. So for any frequency, it's this is set so that the loudest highest level, if you listen to the other podcast we did last week, because loud and level are different, the highest level um, that any frequency gets becomes the dark red section.
Mm-hmm.
So that doesn't tell you there that the
Mm-hmm.
frequency response is perfect because it's normalizing, and the darkest red bit is the highest value that that frequency goes to. And you will see right around 80, 90 dB hertz, which is the bottom scale, the x-axis, the delay moves from almost 0 milliseconds up to about 16, 17, 18 milliseconds.
Mm-hmm.
So basically the subs in that room, that's going to be the crossover. So the crossover that has been applied, the high pass filter on the mains and the low pass filter on the subs,
Mm-hmm.
is adding adding delay. Those two filters add delay. And we can see right now that at that crossover, the subs are essentially giving you peak energy at that measurement position nearly 20 milliseconds later. So if you've got a 80, 90, 100 hertz drum, well, suddenly you've got frequencies there that are not hitting at the same time. Like
Yeah.
that, the frequencies in that range are smeared across 20 milliseconds. And
Well, they're
that,
going to be hitting later. Well, no,
yeah,
they're
but
smeared. The energy
right,
is smeared, but the peak is not coming until 20 milliseconds later, correct?
sure. So if you've got a drum and there is some element of the actual stick or the kick, the pedal,
Mm-hmm.
like so you've got some higher frequency components to that which are coming from the main, and then you've got the lower frequency components coming from the sub. Well, they're no longer aligned in time,
Yeah.
so that just becomes smeared, and the as those frequencies change through that range, that smearing is different.
Mm-hmm.
um that's really important to me. I think even if we can't give a proper solid answer on how noticeable the the shape of that graph is, if you've got a big step there, and that's a gradual incline, that's not a big step. I think the other one maybe had a bigger step in it. um
Yeah.
if you and
At
that
200,
step
it
actually
does,
happens higher. um
which means it'll be more noticeable.
Yeah, I couldn't tell you exactly what happened in that room at 200 hertz, why you've got that step, but you're gonna be able to sense that. You're gonna perceive, and I don't think you could sit there and say, "Oh, I can hear that," without an A/B comparison of removing it.
Mm-hmm.
And this is the problem, I guess. This is why we're kind of down a route of what really happens is I don't think many people have heard a perfect response here. So it's easy for me to say, you'll know when you fixed it. But if they've never experienced it fixed, they don't know what that, like, you'll just feel it get tighter. You'll sense
Mm-hmm.
it. It feels tighter. It feels punchier. It feels, and you'll know it when it's right. But I'm not sure how many people have ever really got it right. So,
Mm-hmm.
like, you can have this system and you look at the frequency response and you think, oh, I've got this absolutely nailed. This is perfect. But could it be better? And you just don't even understand how at this stage. I think so.
Yes, I would agree. And if the, let's say theoretically that in the frequency domain there was an issue at whatever this is, 190 hertz, and it was like a 3 dB difference. 3 dB technically is a lot of energy, but
Right?
our ability to perceive that, I think, is a lot less than people think it is. And I would argue that in a lot of cases, you, depending on what that did in the time, you may just want to leave it alone. Now, this is getting into an area where we're in the vocal range, so it's possible. I would have to go listen to it, and I'm not as smart as some of the other guys that do the calibrations for a living. So we could bring Adam on and have a three-way conversation about this. But to me, I am less likely to want to fix slight deviations like that in frequency if it
Right.
means I'm going to run into issues like this in time. But the problem is a lot of people never look at the wavelet, and because of that, they don't know that they're actually creating an issue.
Absolutely. So we've just had the question come in of where can you see and correct it? This wavelet is under spectrogram. So you go into the spectrogram settings and then you can change one of the drop downs. You'll change that to wavelet. As I said, I don't think I have
Right
REW
here.
on this machine,
No,
so I
I've
can't
got it at the
do
top.
that
You've got
live.
spectrogram at the top, and then
Yeah.
you did what after that?
So there is in the controls option, I believe it is there. You've got a couple of different options that it will be. And if you look at wavelet
Mm-hmm.
in that drop down, that is what this is that we're looking at
And
here.
you
It's the
can get all of
wavelet.
this from one measurement. Like, it's getting all of this information, if I remember correctly. You just have to go look at everything from it.
Absolutely. This is the same data that will have come from just doing a sweep.
Yes.
So this data is already there. So yeah, that is it's this interesting thing now where I am trying to work out, and I don't have the answers yet, but we're getting closer to how can we independently tune that feel that you get from a kick drum versus the frequency response and do that at multiple seats inside a room.
And
And
remember, Ben's trying to do this outside of EQ, correct? Like, you're trying to do as much of this in the design phase to fix these issues so that you're not having to attack things with software.
yes, but I mean that's definitely preferable. And I guess then understanding what you have to fix in EQ
Mm-hmm.
to so around that crossover, well, that's something that we need to understand because we know that when you put a high pass filter on one side and the low pass filter on the other, you're creating delay.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know how all AV processors work because there's only really two that I use, I guess. And in those, you can change those filters. So in a French, what do we like on this podcast about naming brands and products? Is that
No, that's
I come from a CEDIA world where we're not allowed to talk about
oh no,
specific products.
I'm assuming you're talking about Trinov and Storm.
Right. So certainly in a Trinov, I can change the filter slope of my high pass and low pass for bass management.
Mm-hmm.
I've come across rooms, and I mean, my good friend Tom Deli Company was in a room recently, as in like last week, where the calibrator had set the filter slope on the high, like, so the subwoofer slope and the main speaker slope were completely different shapes. Now, there are some reasons to do that. Incompetence may be one of them, but I mean, there are some reasons to do it if you
I won't say
understand.
incompetence, I'll say ignorance. A lot of times
Sure,
it's done not knowingly.
either genius because you absolutely have nailed the right reason for doing it,
Hmm.
or you've misunderstood what that's going to do. But
Mm-hmm.
obviously, by having those filter slopes different, the time effect on each side is different, which
Mm-hmm.
means that you could perfectly align those two speakers at one frequency, and then higher and lower of that crossover, the alignment's going to be out because you've got the time domain of a filter slope different.
Mm-hmm.
I would pretty strongly recommend, if you don't absolutely understand how and why you would do that, that you really want to have the same filter slope on both sides.
And when you're talking about filter slope, you're talking about how many dB per octave you're rolling off from either coming up in frequency from the subs or down in frequency from the speakers, and how they're rolling into each other. Typically, you
Exactly
want
that.
that slope to be the same.
Right.
But in this case, you may have had, just making something up, you may have had 24 dB per octave coming down off the speakers and 12 dB per octave coming off of the subs. I don't
Right.
know.
Exactly
Most
that.
most AVRs, if I remember correctly, are 24 dB per octave.
Yeah.
LR.
The obvious choice to use is a fourth order Linkwitz Riley on both sides,
Mm-hmm.
because if you do that, they have a really nice trick of actually the time just lines itself back up across the
Yep.
whole crossover. You you really don't have to then apply different filters to keep the time domain equal through the crossover. If they're both in LR4, you've kind of added one cycle of delay to both sides. It's frequency dependent, they just line up. That's probably so in products where you can't change it, I imagine
That's
they all
typically
just
how
do
it's
that.
done.
Yeah.
Yes.
Um, but that's interesting that you can change that and play with that. And having that understanding now, so like we could see in that wavelet, well, there is this delay created there. My interest is about essentially removing the delay that creates.
Mm-hmm.
So bringing that back to being completely flat, so that there is no time smearing at that crossover at all, by using some other very clever filters. You know, we could use some all pass filters and things, and we can actually start to change those delays and play around with that to bring it back to being a straight line through that region.
Now, what are you
And then
doing with the all pass filter? Because you're really not adjusting frequency, you're adjusting time.
right. So an all pass filter will, where a normal PEQ filter is affecting frequency and time, or like a high pass or a low pass, you know, we're using those to change the frequency domain, and in return, we get a potentially unwanted effect in the time domain. When we use an all pass filter, we're able to change the time domain without changing the frequency. So we can have this variable changing, like as frequency changes, the delay changes. We can impact intentionally a delay without changing frequency response
Now,
at
it
all.
can, just to be clear, it can impact the frequency domain if you're changing the time, depending on what waves and sound is doing in the room. But you're not doing that in the processing.
Correct. Like the actual inherent, you know, measured at the cone,
Mm-hmm.
frequency stays the same. But certainly, yeah, if you start doing this in a crossover region, by adding and changing that delay, you are absolutely changing the relationship to the speaker you're crossing over to. And that will then change
Yeah.
frequency unless you do the opposite on the other side.
Yeah.
So this becomes a fun game of adding latency on purpose. So if I know certain filters are going to add delay somewhere, well, maybe I then intentionally delay everything to bring it to that same point. So I could use other filters and different latency, and we've got a whole load of things that we can play with to bring everything up to that same level of delay on purpose. And then obviously you delay your main channels to the same. And all you've really added is maybe 20, 30 milliseconds of total latency. Fix the lip sync, obviously, because that would be horrific. But maybe you can trade off some total latency for getting this wavelet flatter. Do you hear it? Do you feel it? That's not 100% certain or agreed, but we definitely think so. There is research that people have done this fully digitally, using headphones. They've added this group delay, like this rising curve we looked at, where the lower the frequency, the later it comes. They've added that digitally into a song and listened to it through headphones to see if you can hear it. And the conclusion is yes, you can. And they pass an A/B test. So people certainly have done stuff to prove it is audible. More research is needed, though, to know how much it's worth. Like, if this took a master calibrator 2 days to completely nail down, is it worth like that cost against how much of an improvement it is? That balance changes for the kind of rooms we
It's always
work
a give
on,
and take, yeah.
right? If it's a $20,000 room, paying a master calibrator for 2 days to try and get this as flat as they possibly can, probably a complete waste of money. There's loads of better things in the room you could have spent that money on that would have more impact. But if it's a $1 million room, well, you've probably already got all the easy wins. This is now let's start finding the last 1%. How do we keep getting this better and better and better? At that stage, right, let's spend the time and dial it in.
So here's a question. I don't think it's necessarily related to this, but it is about smoothness. And I think you alluded to this on the AVS podcast when we were talking about reference, because you were mentioning larger rooms and the difference between perception of larger rooms and smaller rooms as it comes to mastering and things of that nature. But Loki asks, how does distance affect smoothness of speaker responses or the perception of smoothness?
Perception of smoothness. I don't know if I have an answer. I probably need to check. Definitely in room, the speaker will change. So if it's a 2-way speaker, a 3-way speaker, there is a distance away from that where the sound coming off those individual drivers has essentially merged as it was intended to. So, if you've got I'm trying to think of like the biggest speaker I've probably ever listened to, right?
Do those, whatever those big Wilsons and stuff are with all of the speakers.
Exactly that. I was thinking of a YG Acoustics, I think, that we heard the week before Cedar Expo, that this thing's 6 foot tall. If you stood, inches from it and move your ear up and down, you'll only hear those individual cones. You've got different speakers will require you to be a different distance from them before that is now properly combined as the designer intended it to. That distance will change based on the design. There's a manufacturer, I think they're Danish. I can say, right, because we're not on a CD call.
No, you can say it.
So I know Art Acoustic so they basically do a big array. So their tweeters, the louder you want the speaker to play, the more tweeters it will have and the more of its mid-range drivers. So you might have 2 little mids and 1 tweeter on a tiny speaker for surround. That grows to 2 tweeters and 4 to 8 tweeters and 16 mids, up to the huge, great big arrays they've got. I think they go up to like 24 tweeters in a row. And they actually say in their spec sheet, each one of these will get louder, but you also have to now get further away from it because it's designed that those sounds merge correctly and combine as they intended at a longer distance, because you've got so many elements that have to merge. It's designed to do it further away. That has an effect, obviously. Like if you're sat really close to a surround speaker, you might have the tweeter. So there will be a difference of smoothness into a room. I don't I don't know how perceivable that is.
I think it depends on the speaker. This is inherently an advantage that coaxials have because everything is natively time aligned. Your
Right.
tweeter is smack dab in the middle of the woofer. There is no ability, regardless if you're on or off axis, for it to be unaligned. You're
Right.
always going to be getting both at the same time. So as you sit, reiterating what Ben said, as you sit different angles and different distances from speakers, they are designed for everything to sum at a certain distance. Some speakers do things better than others. There are design philosophies that can deal with this over distances, so on and so forth. But another thing that applies to this is as you get into bigger rooms, the loss of SPL over distance decreases because it's a 6 dB
Right.
theoretical loss every doubling of distance. So if you're going from 1 to 2 meters, 2 to 4 meters, 4 to 8 meters, you're losing 6 dB per. But as that increases, right, and the space between the loss increases, the perception of evenness, and I don't know if this is what you meant, the perception of evenness will actually, not just the perception, the actual evenness from within that region becomes more flat.
Yeah.
And I think there's the other part of this is reflections. As you get into bigger
Right.
rooms and speakers get further away or even outside, you're lessening or even stopping reflections, and you're hearing more of the on axis sound or the direct axis or the direct emittance sound instead of reflected energy. And that can, depending on the time that those reflections are taking, the similarity of those reflections coming back off of the reflected surface in comparison to the direct emitted sound, all of that can change how you're perceiving, what your perception is of smoothness or clarity. So that's a disadvantage that smaller rooms have because you're having to deal a lot more with those
Yeah.
reflections in a lot of situations. But there are other issues that larger rooms have. Um, your your decays can be a lot longer. But the other thing that I don't think people think about, and this is something that I noticed in my living room, and I'm kind of going off on a tangent, but it's important. And Ben, I don't remember if we talked about this. Maybe we did with screen size. Was that a conversation I had with you and the perception of screen size and
We,
how
yeah,
loud
it
it
may have been
is?
offline. I can't remember if we talked about it in the AVS podcast, if we got there, but it was definitely in that research that we
Yeah.
alluded to.
So there is absolutely something that there's a lot more psychological phenomena that happens with how we hear and perceive things than people actually think. We get so caught up in the measurements and the technicalities of everything visually, like looking at data, that we forget that our brains are making interpretations based on our surroundings. We are students
I love it. I love
of
it when people are telling us
reflections.
what we said.
Yeah, well, that's important. I'm dumb. I
Yeah.
rely on my chat to be able to tell me what we did. But we are students of reflections, and we build a lot of understanding about a room, about a space based on reflected energy. And this came from a conversation, I think I've talked about this on the podcast before, that I had with Adam when waveforming was first coming out. And a lot of the perceptions were this sounds unnatural. And it sounded unnatural because waveforming was eliminating a lot of reflected energy. And
Right.
so our ears and our brains went, it sounds really clean, but that doesn't sound right. And it was because we weren't getting reflections. And this
Sure.
came about, and it really hit me when I went from black swans in my living room to a pair of Kef Blade ones. And the black swans are phenomenal, but the black swans, they're horns, so they're very narrow in dispersion in comparison to what the blades were doing. And the living room that I have, it's got really tall ceilings. It's a big room. There's no acoustic treatments in it. But when you talk in it, normally you hear a lot of reflected energy. And when I listen to the Black Swans, because they're more directive, I was getting an overpowering sense of direct energy coming from
Yeah.
the speaker. The blades were giving me, even though it was probably measurably worse, it was giving me a much more natural, feel to what my brain was expecting
Right.
in that room. And
Yep.
this goes back to what we were talking about on the ABS podcast with the perception of larger screens instead of holding a phone to your face, where you want things to be louder if the screen is bigger. And that's all coming from, I think we were talking about mastering volumes and the level in cinema and how it can be
Right.
wrong or right, and how they want a reference level in a commercial cinema as opposed to home, because your brain has an expectation of, this is huge, I want it louder. It's like looking
Yep.
at a jet airliner and having it be really quiet. That's not the expectation, and that would be really weird, and your brain wouldn't
Right.
expect that.
Yeah. And
So,
decay time is the same actually. It's interesting the decay. Like if you ever went into a cave and you hear a water drop,
mhm,
like you are expecting a long echoey reverberant of
yes,
decay in a cave. So if you didn't get that, you immediately would feel something was off. And
mhm,
we've got enough learned experience of different environments to know how things should feel. If you get into your car, you don't expect a long reverberation time of two people having a conversation to be like it would if you were in a cave or at a swimming pool. Like if you go to a huge, great big sports arena kind of thing, like you naturally, because you've got so much learned experience, you expect those to be different. And it's weird if they're not,
mhm.
like unsettlingly weird. So it's kind of unsettling actually if you make a room's decay too short for the size of it. Like if you go into an
Yes.
anechoic chamber, you can get a bit dizzy. Like it's weird.
What is your decay in your room?
Um, Frequency dependent, so it is a
Sure.
slope, longer decay at lower frequencies, but we're aiming in our room for just over 0.2 seconds, so it's probably around 0.25 ish. I think it's an interesting one. At that room size, it may even be a
How
bit
big's your
longer.
room?
Oh, you're going to ask me in freedom
No,
units.
you can do
In
meters.
in engineering units, it's 8 meters by 6 by 3.5. And I think actually we're probably close to point 0.3. I think we're about point 0.3. So there is a formula that is useful
Mhm.
for that. Um, it's taken, I think it originally probably stemmed from some BBC research. It ended up as an ICU paper, ITU, ITU. We can type a link to it maybe somewhere, but it's ITU 1116.3. God, I'm a nerd. I should check I've actually got that right.
I'm looking.
ITU 1116.3. Yeah, it is that. The methods for subjective assessment of small impairments in audio systems. God, I mean, sometimes I amaze myself how nerdy and
I'm gonna
boring
post
I
it in
am.
chat.
But in that document, it's page 12, as I recall, they have a formula for room volume versus ideal decay time.
And this
So
is, we alluded to this at the beginning, where there is a level of desirability when we were talking about Tool and the research that was done in response and what people will like. There is a level of what people will like because we are all culminations of our life experiences, but this is what research has shown, at least up until this point, and I will safely say that research is changing, is doing different things and showing that, hey, we learned this and it's not always necessarily true. But this is a great guideline to start with. I will
right,
say, in my room, and our rooms are actually very similar. Your ceilings are quite a bit taller than mine, but
yeah,
volume, I think mine's a little bit longer than
I
yours.
think so. Yeah,
So I think we're about the same. My decay time is actually quite a bit lower. I am
okay,
about 125 milliseconds.
right. Are
So
you carpeted?
I have a rug, no,
Okay,
but I have a lot of, there's 8,000 pounds of plywood in that room. So everything just gets absorbed.
sure.
Um, but it works out. I don't know. I haven't been to your room, so I don't know what I'd have to go back and A/B them. We're getting into the point of,
Yeah,
How much does it matter? I don't know. And really, the only way you can figure a lot of this out, because people's auditory and visual memories are so bad, even though we think they're really good, you would have to direct A/B them. So Ben and I are talking for the entirety of this podcast about things that you're chasing the rabbit, and you're chasing way, way, way into the rabbit hole on what things you can do to make it better. Now, of course, if you're attacking the frequency domain, you can do this in the very beginning. But we're talking about things that if you're already doing summation, you may not gain much, if anything. I don't know. By also looking at time, you may have perfect time already if you did
Right.
summation. There is absolutely a possibility of that, because if you have full summation, really, if it is at its absolute peak, you should be time aligned. But what you're doing with filters could be messing that up. And I think that can come into, people saying, I have a boomy bass, or I have ringing, or I have this. I think a lot of that is because of time. It's
Right.
not because of frequency.
Yeah. So that's interesting what you say there with filters. So we're using waveforming here, right? It's a decent size array. We've got 6 21s on the front wall. We've got 4 21s on the back wall. It's doing what we wanted, right? So that waveforming gives us really good seat to seat consistency. I definitely am guilty of manually adjusting what Trinov gives me. So we are going in and changing things after we're letting optimizer calculate itself, and then there's still potentially things we are changing afterwards that the Trinov doesn't even know has happened. But if you're if you're not and what we can do then is, if I change every single sub, if I apply a filter, I want to slightly change the frequency response by applying that filter to all 10. What I'm doing in the time domain changes equally to all 10.
Mm-hmm.
And what we found is that doesn't break waveforming. Like, we haven't suddenly upset that relationship that waveforming created. As long as we do the same thing to all of them on both arrays, that time domain change remains part of their calculation as such, because it's equal. The interesting thing is when you look at certainly non-waveforming, but if you're looking at 4 subs, like, okay, you've gone quarter points, so you've gone corners, and now you're applying individual filters to each one. Well, even if you've got 4 identical subs and you time align them, now when you to change your overall frequency response, right, you start adjusting and just putting EQ onto front left and then different EQ onto front right, and you keep adjusting that, well, there's going to suddenly be a point where they can't be perfectly time aligned across that whole range, because you're changing the time response differently in each corner. And that could lead to really great summation.
Do you mind explaining a little bit more about what we've said multiple times that, or maybe it's inferred, that applying a filter like a EQ filter changes phase. And what we mean by that at that range is you're changing, correct me if I'm wrong, but you're kind of changing the driver's position in relationship, or the waveform of arrival at the main listening position, because the driver position, because of distance and everything, may be different. But the waveform arrival at the reference seating position will then be different for that frequency that you've adjusted using EQ and maybe things adjacent to it, to another sub. So if if they're all in time alignment, which you should do at the very beginning, and then you start modifying frequency when you do time alignment, the waveform will arrive ideally all at the same time, and you'll get a summation. But if you start adjusting EQ on one sub, well, now for that frequency, most of it will arrive at the same time, but now that X frequency may arrive out of alignment, and you're going to get some type of anomaly.
And there are reasons, essentially, I guess, for doing that. If your seat is in a null at a specific frequency, right? So you've just got 2 subs on the front wall, and the seating position is, let's say it's right on the halfway point in the room. So now you're right in the first room mode. You're going to have a null relative. It's going to, you can calculate what it will be, but there is going to be a null at certain frequencies because of where the seat is.
And that's because
So
waveforms, as they run into each other, are just going to cancel each other out.
right. So the wave comes past you, it hits the back wall, it now comes back, and when the returning reflected wave comes from the back wall and it's meeting the because it's a cycle and we draw them like they're waves, but obviously they're longitudinal pressure waves, but it's easier to think of as like a sine wave. So that sine wave is continuing from the front and we have a different one coming from the back because it's reflected. There'll be a point where one is at high pressure and one's at low pressure and they cancel each other out. So that wave, and that doesn't move because of the way it functions. That dip that's cancelled now is standing. It stays still. It doesn't propagate through the room. It remains at that physical distance into the room. So you could add some rear subwoofers, and at the frequency that cancellation is, that you have a problem, you intentionally are changing the delay so that you're basically removing the problem of that reflection, and you're now cancelling out at that frequency. You're cancelling that reflection as such.
You're canceling the cancellation,
right? And you can fiddle around in that time domain to remove some of that null to get this more even frequency response.
But the other thing you could do without having more subs is you could move the seating position,
right?
Because then the distance, because you're not if the subs don't move, you're not changing the relationship or correlation between the waveform and it reflecting, but where you are in that position changes. So what you're actually hearing is different. And you don't even have to move your seats. You can get up, move around, and you're going to be able to tell what this is. And this is why it's always subcrawl, right? What is the subcrawl doing? Well, it's changing your relationship between that main wave and the reflected energy coming back, or you change your seating position. Adding other subs changes or allows you to cancel those, augment, different ways of saying it, but you guys get the gist of it.
Have you I've not asked you this question, so I'll do it on the spot. Have you done any of the HAA courses with Jerry LeMay?
I have not.
So I mean, when I did it, I did level 1, 2, 3 in a week. So it was 5 days solid. I'm not even sure you can do 5 days in the classroom anymore. I think the first day or two is offline and you do it from a book now. But that becomes essentially a 5-day course. And the real big thing, like, you're learning what happens when you change different, you physically are doing these things.
Yes.
But you work through this process, and a huge chunk of that course is, right, let's work out in the room where the room modes are going to be, and then let's position speakers and seats to mitigate as much of that as we can before we do anything else.
Yeah.
So take your room, draw on it where the first, second, and third length modes are. Where are the first, second, and third width modes? Well, don't put seats there. Get them out of those areas, especially where they cross. Keep them as far away from that as you can. And then where you can't fix those problems with seat movements, where you position the subs will then mitigate. So if you can move the subwoofers into positions that they sum actively to cancel that naturally, right, before we've EQ'd anything, we've got the speakers in the right place and the subs in the right place, and we could have got rid of loads and loads. Like, you're so close to being where you want to be in the physical domain before you've touched any EQ, just from not activating the room modes as badly and by intentionally sitting not where they're going to be at their worst.
And I hope that gives some people some understanding about what's going on, because I think the industry has a bad habit of saying, oh yeah, don't do that, but they don't explain why that's a bad idea. And this is exactly why square rooms are a bad idea, right? And the ceiling actually plays into this as well. It's not just the side walls. Your floor and ceiling play into this. So you can kind of get away with more if you don't have a perfectly square room, even if it's rectangular in the vertical. REW actually has an excellent tool for simulating, especially subwoofer placement. The caveat here is that it is not necessarily true to life. It is
Right.
important to look at it as a reference and that it gets you in the ballpark. But what you do, what actually occurs in the room, because there are many more variables with materials, what is sitting behind the materials, the wall construction, subtype, all of that stuff, that will impact this as well. And then the last thing, not the last thing about this conversation, but another thing that's just got me thinking about it, and I think we talked about this on the last podcast when we were doing it with ABS, is that getting more people in the room will directly impact how this
Yep.
is experienced, because we are absorbers. We're
Right.
big wet paper bags or meat
Yep.
sacks, if you will. And we are absorbers for virtually all frequencies down to a certain point. We don't have the depth or the mass in order to deal with ultra low frequencies. But have you ever wondered why, when you get a bunch of people in your room, it sounds different? And then the other part of that is, have you ever thought about that as the room gets hotter, you're directly affecting how everything's going to sound, not just with audio propagation, but how the speakers are reproducing everything? So
Yep.
these are variables that people, I think, experience, but they don't necessarily causate to what or think about what is actually causing them. So
Yeah.
we kind of got off on a little bit of a tangent, but here's a question from Finster. I think it's more of a statement, and it comes back to the wavelets. So for proper time alignment, in addition to what it sounds like, we're looking for a smooth decline. And I think he's talking about from the lowest
Yeah.
frequency up to the highest frequency, as opposed to a sharp drop in spectrograph you showed earlier. Yes.
Yeah. And I think this is interesting when he says here what it sounds like, right? So what we can't miss in this conversation, and this is where we are really trying to find every last thing, is a lot of this is how it feels.
Mm-hmm.
So if you've got that summation and you've got the frequency response right, then sure, it will sound right. But like, theoretically, right? But
Theoretically.
the I think as much of this is a feeling, like, and which is why that it's quite difficult to like, yeah. I am a big kind of what's the word? The opposite of a fan, like not an enemy, but I am very critical
Not
of
advocate. I
no,
know what you
I'm
mean.
very critical of remote calibrations. Um,
Yeah. Yeah, I would agree
it's
with that.
it's something that I can't get on board with, because this interplay of what the microphone shows, what you hear, what you feel in that room, we can understand a lot from looking at these graphs, but what you hear and feel, like ultimately that's the answer. Like we're
Mm-hmm.
looking for something which is pleasurable to listen to, and it feels great. If you want the impact, it's there. And I would struggle to be able to dial this in from a graph and know that I'm just making improvements. Like the amount of times anyway, you can spend 3 hours playing around, you're doing EQ, you're changing things, you're moving stuff in the time and frequency domain, and it's getting better and better and better. And then you think, right, let me just go back to where I was 3 hours ago, right? And you listen to it, you're like, oh my God, it was way better. Like I've just
Yeah.
spent 3 hours making this
Yeah.
worse,
We've all been there. And I think
right?
it's how I look at it is when you get it dialed in, like if you just focus on time, let that be a baseline and then deviate if you want to at all to a subjective experience. There's a prime example of when we were calibrating the MadVR Experience Center. Around the crossover point, there was some noise. I don't know what it was in the dialogue. And it measured, if I remember correctly, very flat, but it just didn't sound right. So
Right.
we made a small change. We deviated from flat,
Yep.
but that made it sound subjectively better.
Right.
Now, could there have been something measurably that we just weren't paying attention to? Absolutely. So I cannot say that, technically, if it's this way, it'll be the best. I
Right.
don't have enough. I've been in this. I've done a lot in the field, but I can't say that anybody that can. I don't know. Maybe some. Dr. Floyd Toole may be able to. He's got a
Right.
lot of experience in this. But for me, I don't know. All I know in that capacity is that something didn't sit right, so we deviated. And that is
Yeah.
okay. These are your theaters. Um, but it's just really important to at least start from a baseline and understand the causation of everything that you're doing. Because if you make a change, but you don't understand quite fully the effect that it's going to have, you may be in for a bad time. And then you may not understand why these certain things are happening, and you may just get in a hole that you can't dig yourself out of. Did we sum everything up?
Yeah.
Have we reached the end?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, this is going to be interesting, you and I just chatting, right? Because we probably don't have a. It's not like when I'm teaching or something like, right, I've got to nail in a conclusion at a certain time because
Mm-hmm.
that, you know, there was a learning objective. This is
It's
a
more
fun chat
theoretical.
about a topic we don't have all the answers to,
This
right?
is
So
more of us talking about something that we hope the industry becomes more aware of, because I think if they do become more aware of and they put more time and effort into it and we can come to a conclusion, there possibly is a conclusion. I'm sure I may get a PM from somebody on AVS and be like, hey, there was a paper written X, Y, or Z time ago that shows all of this data with all of this research. That would be great. I am fully open, and Ben, I think you're the same way, to being told, hey, everything that you said is wrong. I
100%.
will freely admit that. This is just something where we have started going. It's an interesting topic, and I think it's something that the industry needs to pay more attention to, because time is ever present, ever marching, and something that a lot of people don't pay attention to for whatever
Yeah.
reason. What should we talk about?
And
Go
it's
ahead.
always going to be the challenge because we don't really know how to describe this in that once you've experienced it and you feel it, you
I
know
think
it.
feel is correct.
Yeah. And like we have enough experience, we've been in enough rooms, we've experienced enough things to know when subjectively it feels right and it
Mm-hmm.
sounds right. But how easily can you describe some of those micro,
Mm,
like, and I would say this is a phrase I use quite a lot, is the lack of microdynamics. When you hear a room that's had too much EQ used, not just in the bass but everywhere, and how do you really describe that feeling of a room that you just know has had too much EQ? It
how
feels a bit oppressive, like the air has disappeared. But these are quite fluffy hi-fi magazine terms. But you absolutely know it when you hear it.
the easiest way that I can put it is I want it to hear natural. As a prime example, if I was in a room with a bass drum, a kick drum, a snare, and the bass hits, I want it to feel the same. I want to feel the compression hit my chest and then be gone. I don't want it to
Right.
linger. And so there are absolute things, there are measurements that you can look at with group delay, with ringing, and this is where you're getting into the nitty gritty of sub design and cabinet volume and
Right.
dealing with resonances and all of this stuff, which I really do want to talk about. And I think it'd be great to have somebody like Jeffrey come on and talk about. Oh, oh, he's back. Hold on. I think he might have.
I'm back, I think. Yeah.
Did you accidentally hit
No,
escape?
I didn't. Oh, not
Oh,
what I'm aware of.
oh,
I may
just
have
didn't
done.
like you.
Is
Oh,
escape
okay.
is escape
But
an exit from this software?
I don't know. I just thought you may have closed the window. But anyway, I think it would be great to have somebody like Jeffrey come on and talk about cabinet design for the
Right.
subs and look at, because he actually made a white paper on differences between different cabinets and looking at specifically group delay and resonances that can apply to
And
different
this is
things.
before we even think of sealed versus ported, because
Well, it's actually looking at seal versus ported
right,
versus all of these different things and
okay,
how they're looking measurement wise in time and how that impacts perception, right?
yeah,
So, one of the things that I've noted, and I'm sure you get a lot of the stuff about your room as well, because of those 21s, is once a frequency hits, it's then gone. Like if you hit
yeah,
a snare or a kick, it hits and then it's just as fast as it hit, it's gone. There's no ringing, there's no nothing. It's not holding, and that's natural. So to me, the best way to describe what Ben and I are after, in my opinion, is natural reproduction of
Yeah.
whatever we're doing. The lower frequencies, and I don't remember if I mentioned this to you. I think I did, but Peter actually brought this up, and I love it. It's shocking how many things Peter brings up there that make a lot of sense that I had thought about before. But it's how much infrasonic we're actually surrounded by, even though you
Yeah.
can't hear it, and lower and lower and lower. And it's important that that just kind of lingers. It's the dessert that goes in after the meal that holds everything together.
Yeah.
And I don't necessarily want those, like you're looking at those spectra plots, to hit and then be gone, because I don't feel like that's how that frequency actually exists
Right.
in real world. There's a longer decay time, at least in different environments. In my experience, this is not
Yeah.
me having any measurable data or anything. This is just me existing in the world and being my own instrument for what I have
Yeah.
perceived. But I think what we're trying to get to for all of this at the end of the day is, if we watch something, if the goal during reproduction was for it to be natural, and that's a totally other variable of all of this, is we have no idea how this content was
Absolutely.
being mastered, is did it feel natural? Did it feel in a way that it broke the immersion for whatever I was taking in from the content?
Right.
Because that's what we want. We want to be immersed. We want to be taken in where the room falls away. And frankly, if you get that, however your room is, I think mission accomplished.
Yeah.
Um,
And some of that is just pure entertainment, right? And I guess you can look at some of, I don't know, what a typical demo content we would use for this, like a John Wick movie.
the
Well,
shotguns.
right. If you're
Yeah.
stood the other side of a room and a shotgun goes off, sure, you don't feel that wave in the chest necessarily, right? You know, depending on how far you are from it. But if I'm watching that on screen, the entertainment factor, I want to feel
Mm-hmm.
it in my liver. Like I want to get that visceral kick from it as much as what I hear.
Well, I think the
So
assumption in these rooms is that everyone has the same experience. So you just want to have that experience in the main listening position, and then you would just assume that it's everywhere in the room. I don't think you could go about saying, well, depending on the distance I am away from something, my experience needs to change. I don't think we could do that.
no, sure. But like I mean from reality, like I don't
Oh,
necessarily
yeah.
want reality, right? I
There's
don't
a fun
necessarily
factor.
want that to feel like a shotgun really would feel at 20 feet. If like just because reality might not hit that way, but this is entertainment. So
Sure.
I want natural, but I also still want fun.
That's Now we're getting into subjectivity and a bunch of other variables that come in, because, as I mentioned previously, the mastering of the content is now greatly impacting how it's going to be perceived in the room. And you may chase all of this stuff, and based solely on the content you're using as a test, you may be invalidating yourself, because maybe that content isn't able to deliver what you're trying to chase, potentially. Um, Ryan says the mixing is as much creating the emotion you'd have in that moment as much as any realism. I guess
Yeah,
that's what you're describing, Ben.
yeah,
That's fair. Yeah.
yeah. And like annoyingly, because he is always the fountain of wisdom. As Peter Elliott has said many, many
Maybe
times. Like he genuinely, like I'm now lucky enough to call him a business partner. You've obviously worked with him on projects and stuff, right? So
mm-hmm.
we spend quite a lot of time with Peter. But this emotional thing is quite interesting because we all know what a piano sounds like because you've heard one in real life somewhere.
Yes.
You know what somebody singing live sounds and feels like. I thankfully don't know what a massive explosion feels like. Like I've been far enough away from a stick of dynamite, you know, like
Mm-hmm.
a demonstration at a mining place to know, okay, I know roughly but I've not been in a plane crash or like so those experiences are really challenging because we'd say, oh, we're trying to recreate like reality.
Mm-hmm.
We've got no idea what
But
those things are really like.
going back to somebody's singing or piano, kind of going with what Ryan said, in the conveyance and creating emotion to enhance the feeling of emotion, sometimes there's a deviation from natural
Yep.
with things like reverb, or different types of EQ applied to the singer's voice during mastering, different types of Maybe they're using a synth and it's slightly changing how the piano is sounding. The room, all of that stuff with that. I guess it depends on the emotion that they're trying to there's so many at the end
Yeah.
of the day, there's so many variables that come into this. I think it's more of now going back, maybe changing what I said earlier because we got further into the conversation, trying to create a room and experience that is indicative of you and what you're trying to chase. And I think if you're able to accomplish that and enjoy it, and if you're able to do so in a way where you can just put the remote down and not constantly have to change things to
Right.
do whatever. And I have thankfully, and I think Ben, maybe you have in your room, I've gotten to a point where I don't even bother with the remote. I turn something on. I have a pretty good idea of the volume I need to set it at, and then I just let it go.
Yeah.
I'm just changing tracks to what I want to listen to. I'm not trying to chase anything. And if you can get to that point, it is very freeing. And I think that's what we're talking about in this is just having the knowledge and understanding to look at what's going on in the room to create the experience that you're after. I don't think at the end of the day there is a fundamental this is how it has to be. I think there is a line of what a lot of people would enjoy. It may not be what you would enjoy most, but if you can start there, understand what the measurement is saying, and then curtail and change and tweak the baseline of your room to be able to get to that AV nirvana, I think that's where we're just trying to guide people
Yeah.
to get to. Yeah.
Yep. And it's I guess the challenge for us doing this professionally is different from an enthusiast, because quite often we're trying to design all of those things maybe a year in advance of it being built. So you're planning how much of that you can deliver and how much flexibility we leave the calibrator to the last day. Like, as an enthusiast, that room will evolve over time. Like, if there's something you don't like, you'll fix it. For one of our clients, it has to be right day one. You're not going to, oh, okay, actually those speakers didn't really work for you. They don't deliver exactly what you wanted. We'll change them out in a room we've just built. Like, that's not
Well,
going
what
to
is
work.
right? I mean, that's kind of where you have to have a status quo as a professional of you've got to go in with some semblance of what you believe to be correct instead of kind of guessing because you don't know at the end of the day what the
Right.
client actually wants. You have to deliver what you think they want,
Yeah.
unfortunately.
Yep. So yeah, that's the fun challenge is matching that the understood expectation of what the client wants, getting a grip and the feel of what they want. Some, like, we've got a job on at the moment that's a 4-year build. So
Mm-hmm.
there's 4 years between the first demo that we gave them here and when we'll hand their room over. Well, their taste and things may change, like their
Yep.
life could change, but we're working to this design of, and that starts from how big the room is to, right now I expect that room to be projection based, but by 2028 I might have changed my mind. So
I
what
hope
what is
not.
right? Well, we'll see. I agree currently that projection speakers behind the screen is still going to be the way we'll go, but there's a couple of years yet. We'll see what that brings.
Yeah. I meant more from a
I'm
design
always open to be
philosophy and
wrong.
changing things in the front.
If somebody comes up with something that works amazingly, a micro LED screen it brings every video benefit we could ever want, and they
Mm-hmm.
find a way of getting the audio to match the finest speakers behind an AT screen, then I'm willing to listen.
I agree.
I'm never going to switch off to someone's going to make that perfect one day.
Yeah.
I think we're getting closer, but we're not. I wouldn't swap my own system yet.
I think we've made it to competency. I don't think we've made it to good yet. It's acceptable for a lot of systems, I guess,
Yeah,
depending on the client.
priority of needs. Exactly
Yeah,
that.
that is true. Okay. Well, we'll wrap it
Cool.
up because we've been going for an hour and a half. We'll be doing more of this. You're out of town in Asia next week.
Yes. So I think we end up about, oh God, it's a lot of hours different. We're almost 12-hour different time zones next week.
We could try and do it. We'll see. You and I will have to talk about it and see if
Yeah,
it's
we'll
even
try and line it
feasible.
up.
But we'll be doing more of these. If you have any suggestions for topics for us getting into the nitty gritty of things, drop them into the comments. Don't put them in chat because I won't see the chat. Drop into the comments of this video and we will see about adding them to a future discussion. Ben is going to be doing more of these with us because he's as much of a nerd about all of this as I am. And he loves sharing the knowledge with everybody so that everybody's AV journey can be really as good as it can. So, Ben, thank you very much for joining us. Thanks for taking the time to do this and
Thank
into the
you.
future. Hopefully you enjoy doing them as much as I do. But we'll wrap it up there and you can't do this Thursday, so we probably will do one next week, but it's not going
Yep,
to
we'll
more
work
than
it out.
likely be at the same time. So we will see
Cool.
you guys in an episode soon. Be watching for the schedule to get posted on, or a scheduled video to get posted, and we will go from there. Enjoy your AV journey. Stay
Cheers.
safe out there. See you guys later.